The Babywise parenting method uses what is called the parent-directed feeding philosophy. You may be wondering what that means, what that looks like, and how that happens in practice. We'll talk about that in this video and more. Let's get started. But first, introductions. Hello, my name is Valerie. I blog at babywisemom.com and have been blogging there since the year 2007. I have 4 children who currently range in age from 12 to 19 years old. I used Babywise with all 4 of my babies and absolutely love it, so let me explain it to you. So first I'll start by explaining a couple of different feeding philosophies that you may be a little familiar with. One is attachment parenting, and with that you just respond to babies crying essentially with feeding your baby. And that's often the first try. When a baby cries, that's the first thing that people try, is to feed their baby when they cry. The opposite end of that spectrum would be hyperscheduling, and that is saying baby eats at 7 and 10 and 1 and that's it. Like if baby seems hungry before 10, baby's waiting till 10. So you have those two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, and those are like generalized. And of course, in either scenario, you could have exceptions, but generalized, those are kind of your 2 extreme ends of the spectrum. Parent-directed feeding, or PDF, falls right in the middle of that. So that means that when your baby cries and you're following parent-directed feeding, that you consider crying and you consider the clock. So just because your baby's crying doesn't mean you're going to feed your baby for sure. If your baby's crying, you're going to think, oh, okay, so typically, ideally, my baby's eating at 7 and then again at 10, and my baby's crying at 9:30. So, it's not the time that my baby typically eats. So let's consider, is my baby hungry early today? If so, I'm going to feed my baby. Or is my baby crying for some other reason and my baby isn't actually hungry yet? And if that's the case, then I'm not feeding my baby yet. I'm going to address the other root cause of my baby crying right now. That also means that you are often feeding your baby before your baby cries for food. So you're not just waiting for your baby to cry for you to decide oh, my baby's probably hungry. You are often feeding your baby before your baby even shows major signs that your baby's hungry. There are a list of baby hunger cues that babies typically show, and crying is actually one of the last things that a baby does when the baby's hungry. So when you're feeding your baby and not just waiting for crying, then you're feeding your baby who is hungry sooner than the crying happens. So with PDF, you're using 3 things. You've got your clock, you've got your hunger cues, and you have your parental assessment. That's you taking all things into account to decide when your baby should eat. If you need help understanding baby's hunger cues, I do have an entire blog post and video that explain it in great detail. So that's something super valuable and important to understand. Obviously, if one of your main components in this equation is hunger cues, you need to understand hunger cues well. So make sure that you are familiar with all of those hunger cues so that you can accurately use your assessment. So what exactly is assessment? So the parental assessment is you. This is you using your brain, your common sense, your knowledge, your intuition to help determine what is best for your baby. There are a lot of variables you have to track as a parent, and fortunately, you're an adult, you've lived long enough to have some experience in life, you have some knowledge, you have some level of education. There are things that you know because you've lived some life experience. And of course, there's a lot of things you don't know yet because you haven't experienced them yet. So especially if you are a first-time parent, there's going to be a lot of times that you're going to go through this equation and you're going to assess and decide, my baby is hungry. And you'll try to feed your baby and realize, my baby wasn't actually hungry. Oops, that's okay. You're not going to be perfect. You are just learning right now also. And so you take that into your knowledge base and you use that to apply the next time. Or maybe sometimes you'll think like, no, my baby definitely isn't hungry, and you'll try a few other things, and then you'll feed your baby and find out, oh, your baby actually was hungry. Like, again, that's okay. You take all of this information and you store it up for future. Even if you're not a very first time parent, every baby is different. And so what your first child showed you as surefire hunger cues is probably not going to be what your second child will show you. So with every baby, you have to learn what that baby's cues are. I feel like with every baby, you get faster and better at figuring those things out. So you should catch on faster. And I think you also have the perspective to understand like, okay, I'll get it. Like, I was wrong this time. A few more times, I'm going to have this figured out. So let's brush up on some clock talk a little bit. So typically with a baby, like with a newborn, you are typically feeding every 2.5 to 3 hours. And there are points in the day when that often can change, especially evening. It's not uncommon for a newborn to eat every 2 hours as you lead up to bedtime or lead up to a dream feed. But when you're considering the clock, like, okay, our typical goal is that we're going to eat every 2.5 to 3 hours. And as your baby gets older, that can move to my baby eats every 3 to 3.5 hours, or my baby eats every 3 to 4 hours. And at some point, my baby eats every 4 hours. So the length does increase as your baby gets older. But with a younger baby, we're at typically every 2.5 to 3 hours. So when you're doing your assessment, if it hasn't been that 2.5 or 3 hours yet, then you consider other things that could be the cause for your baby's crying. You at least run through that consideration. If it has been 2.5 to 3 hours, then you quickly think like, yeah, my baby's crying because it is time to eat. It's eating time. Perfectly expected for my baby to cry right now. So something that you have to be aware of is that growth spurts happen every 3 to 4 weeks. And so there are going to be times that your baby is crying early and is hungry early, and that's totally normal. It'd be very good for you to understand growth spurts, and I, again, have a video and blog post about that. So be sure to check that so you're aware. Growth spurts are normal, nothing to stress out about. When the growth spurt is over, your baby goes back to eating the interval that they were eating before. Nothing to stress out about. Just feed your baby with the growth spurt. Feed your baby when your baby's hungry, even if it's only been a couple of hours, even if it's only been an hour and a half, you feed that hungry baby. All right, that wraps up what parent-directed feeding is, what that involves, what it encompasses. So now you should understand that with Babywise and parent-directed feeding, you are the parent and you take your information that you have in your head from the clock and listening to your baby's cries and getting to know your baby and the sound of their cries and assessing what could that cry mean and how should I respond to it. You don't just have like a black and white, I always respond here or I always respond here. You start here and you take the information that you have and you decide where to go, and it can be in lots of different spots in between, and then you're able to help your baby with this great knowledge and information and thinking mind, instead of being a slave to black and white rules. As always, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments and I will answer. And thanks for watching and have a great day.